Good people of YouTube, my name is Spanner. Welcome back for some more Deathgate. So let's continue over here and go into this hidden tunnel. The dog stays behind, bristling and growling at the tunnel. The air in this small hidden cavern is heavy and thick. Something happened here, something very evil. And let's take this robe. There's a black robe and a spellbook. Let's take the robe first. Your fingers touch the black material of the robe. It feels inexplicably cold. The frost runs up your arm, and soon your whole body begins to shiver. The rocks of the cave seem to take on a life all of their own. They whirl and twist and become something totally new. You realize that you are seeing a vision of an entirely different place. You see a man, dressed in the robe you touched. Although the room is dark, he is unmistakably Sartan. He stands in front of a gigantic stone spire covered with magic runes. His attention is focused on a large rune in the center of the spire. A nervous dwarf stands nearby, watching this man cast spell after spell at the rune. The wizard curses and yells as the blue fire strikes the stone, but without effect. Finally, a particularly fierce spell actually affects the column. Its usually constant blue glow grows faint. With a triumphant shriek, the wizard commands the dwarf to approach the spire and break the rune. The dwarf quakes with fear but remains steadfast. He approaches the rune with a hammer. With a hammer and wedge held out in front of him. When he cautiously touches them to the rune, a massive explosion throws his body back like a rag doll. The man shrieks again, but in frustration, he curses the dwarf's limp body for its weakness. The strength of madness enters the wizards, and, even while maintaining the spells that hold the spire's rune at bay, he simultaneously casts a mighty spell, too quick to memorize, upon the dwarf's corpse. A misty image of the dwarf appears, floating over the body. Its expression is one of pain and terror. It's as if something has taken hold of it, in the manner of a rope wrapped around its foot, and is dragging it back into the corpse. When the spirit image has been totally subsumed by the body, the dwarf's eyes jerk open. The man in black screams at the dwarf to finish his task. Slowly, the dwarf drags himself to his feet, gathers up the hammer and wedge, and approaches the spire. He touches the tools to the rune again. Again the magic reacts, but now the explosion only rips flesh from his bones, and somehow the dwarf manages to stay his ground. 5 blows of his hammer force a chunk from the center of the room to fall away. Immediately, the rune's glow vanishes and all of the other runes on the spire grow a bit darker. The man in black laughs as he picks up the piece of stone. He admires the rock in his hands as if it were some kind of relic. Then he turns his attention to the obvious hole in the spire's rune. With his free hands, he weaves an intricate spell that is too complicated to follow, and suddenly the rune appears to be whole again. The strange pair exit the chamber, leaving the spire seemingly whole, but much darker than it started. The scene shifts. Now you see the same man seated on a throne. He holds a scepter which has as its headpiece the same chunk of stone from the spire. Others in his court display obvious fear of their ruler and keep quite a distance from him. This man seems to prefer it. You see no sign of the dwarf. Another scene. The wizard is much older. He is handing the scepter to another younger man, whose face bears a close resemblance to that of the wizard. You can see the avarice and longing in his eyes, and the reluctance in the eyes of the wizard in black. After the younger man has snatched the scepter away, he takes no further notice of the older wizard, who walks slowly off. Now you see the old wizard in this very cave. He stands on the rock floor alone. The madness in his eyes is overwhelming. He murmurs to himself for a while. You catch only the mouthings of a few words. They'll never find me, and must never bring me back. Never. His hands wave aimlessly in the air. But then you begin to see the blue traces of a spell. Soon, the rune construct is completed. It flies into his body and explodes in flames. The wizard thrashes a bit, but in short order is no more than a pile of ash. Surprisingly, the robe he wore has been left untouched by the flame. Nothing happens for a while, then you realize that the visions have ended, and that you are looking at the same scene only thousands of years later. The robe lies in the same place, covering the ashy remains of the old wizards. Tentatively, you pick up the robe, but no further images haunt you. Okay, we got a robe, here are some remains. Only a vaguely human outline of ash remains on the floor. And now let's take the spell book and read it. There's a lot of useful information in here. A study of necromancy. Let it be known by any who would read this book, who would learn of the dark practice of necromancy, that it is forbidden. Let the reader do so at the peril to his soul and to those of his brethren. This tome is intended for information's sake only. He who disregards this warning and undertakes to practice this discipline has committed a crime against his race, and at this time a crime punishable by death by order of the Sartan High Council. If this warning strikes you as too harsh, you are obviously not familiar with the after effects of this art. Simply put, for every person brought back from death, another of his race shall die untimely. This spell is tantamount to murder. Therefore, it is treated as such. Necromancy is literally death magic. It can be used to draw back the spirit of the dead and force it to inhabit the body it has rightfully vacated. This does not bring the dead back to life. Indeed, the body loses its ability to feel and heal its wounds. Eventually, even the best kept corpse will be useless. Countless accidents and daily wear will eventually exhaust its potential, and the spirit never quite grasps what has happened. It exists in a state of constant confusion. In its own mind, it is reliving its past. It replays events that it has experienced despite different environments and the lack of other players and props. Some lose contact with this world entirely and live only in their created reality of the past, but that is an extreme case. Most spirits can understand and communicate with the living. This is their only benefit. Resurrected corpses obey the living as well as they can, given their mental and physical limitations. In a situation where the living cannot function, at peril to life or health, the corpse can perform admirably. Necromancy was discovered by accident. A failed experiment to uncover the soul's destination after death unexpectedly provided the basis for resurrection. No one understands precisely what the spell does. The spell's results are understood. But where are we drawing the spirit from? What are we consigning it to? Why does another person have to die? And why only from the same race? These questions will have to remain unanswered, as all experiments involving use of the spell have been prohibited. The spell itself is as follows. This text should serve only to remind that the practice of necromancy has been condemned. By forgetting the art and its consequences, we risk that future generations will unwittingly follow our footsteps, rediscover the discipline, and repeat our mistakes. Look upon this text as knowledge, pure and simple. Knowledge never kills or destroys, except in the hands of those who misuse it. So, a lot of information in this cave. Okay, we learned a spell. Necromancy. So, this is the resting place of Clytus I. You know, the man with the dwarf we found near Telestia. beyond the wall with the arrow puzzle. Yeah, so Clytus the First, apparently he sabotaged the Colossus and removed a piece from it. That's why this world is dying. And then he cast an illusion on it to make it seem that all was well. So that's basically what happened. And now we will speak more with our favorite wizard, Balthazar. The dog happily runs up to you. You run up to Balthazar, eager to discuss the amazing vision you've just experienced.
I just had an incredible vision when I picked up this black robe. What do you think it means?
A vision? Tell me about it. This is amazing. You've just experienced the life of our first dynast, Clytus the First. It answers quite a few questions I've had about his rise to power and his reign. It also answers many questions about our current situation.
How did this happen? Why did I see all of these things when I picked up the robe?
I'm not exactly sure. It's possible that when Clytus took his own life, the robe became infused with his spirit. This happens sometimes, especially when the death is particularly violent and the victim is very powerful in magic. When you picked up the robe, what was left of Clytus, lying there for thousands of years, passed through you. Your mind interpreted this by showing his memories. This is all speculation, you realize.
Can you interpret the bit about Clytus's grab for power?
I would be happy to. What would you like to know?
Wasn't there a ruling council at that time? Could you tell me about it?
The High Council once governed over all of Abarak. Clytus was a member. It democratically created laws for all sartan and at one time the mensch as well. When the mensch woke the sartan, the council was the body that decided on the course of action. To put a handful of the mensch to sleep and wait for the interconnection. The council would have continued to rule if Clytus had not been so power-hungry.
How did he convince the council to let him disband it and institute a monarchy?
He didn't have the political power to do that. No one did. So he required magical power to back his play. He made himself undefeatable with the scepter. No one dared to oppose him after he created it. It was child's play to institute the monarchy. He merely eliminated every possible opponent.
Why did he do all of this?
I believe that to be a member of Abarak's council, the only requisite was a mastery of magic. This implied intelligence, but not necessarily sanity. Clytus was clearly insane, if not before his play for power, then afterward.
Let's move on to another topic.
Very well.
Can you tell me exactly what happened to the Colossus?
The Colossus is the source of Abarak's magic. It is what warms the stone, melts the ice, and feeds water throughout the world. It was an unparalleled marvel, by far the greatest of the ancients' achievements. It contained so much power that it's easy to see why Clytus lusted after it.
What was the rune that he was battling with?
It was a containment rune. The spell was a cap for the Colossus's magic. It sealed the spells inside to keep the magic from flowing out, so that the Colossus would last forever.
What happened when he finally subdued it?
Over a period of several months, Clytus wove an intricate set of spells that temporarily weakened the containment rune. When the structure had drained the rune of enough power, he had his dwarf servant carve a chunk of the rune away. It was a central line of the rune. Without it, the symbol was meaningless and therefore powerless. The Colossus's magic began to drain away.
What did he do by removing a chunk of the rune?
It was much like taking a chunk of flesh from your body. The magic sealed inside of the Colossus started to leak out, like blood from a vital wound.
Why did he do this when it would eventually destroy this world? Didn't he think ahead?
It's true that eventually the Colossus would lose enough power to cease supporting Abarak. I'm sure Clytus must have known this. It's possible that Clytus was counting on the interconnection. He must have reasoned that thousands of years would pass before it would actually make a difference. Long before that, the interconnection would occur, and Abarak would survive on the energies provided from it. On that, I'm a little unclear as well. The interconnection is a little mystical to me, but it's obvious that the ancients believed in it. Perhaps they shouldn't have. Thousands of years have passed, and no interconnection has taken place. The Colossus is failing, and it's taking our world with it.
What did he do at the end, before he left it?
Clytus was intelligent. He knew that people would see the Colossus with a huge chunk missing from the containment rune and realize something was amiss, so he placed an illusion upon it. Now the Colossus looks normal, even feels normal, but the hole is still there, the rune is still broken, and magic continues to flow.
Can the Colossus be fixed?
That's an interesting question. I suppose it could. If the rune were reconnected, it would begin to function again. The spell would hold in the magic as it is supposed to. I don't know if the Colossus has enough magic left at this point to support Abarak anymore, but at least it wouldn't lose anymore. The original fragment, if it were replaced, would do this. Actually, it wouldn't have to be the original fragment. Anything that had the missing line that fit into the hole would reconnect the rune. The complete rune is the important element, not the composition of the rock. If something with a fragment shape were placed inside the hole, the containment rune would reactivate.
Remember the scepter in the statue in Telestia? Well, that's something we need to get.
Enough about this subject.
Very well.
What's the deal with the dwarf?
The dwarf was Clytus's personal servant. He worshipped Clytus, very like a well-trained dog. I believe that's how Clytus saw him as well, not much more than an animal.
Why did Clytus bring him along?
Clytus needed someone else to break the rune. It required all of his concentration and effort merely to subdue it. While he focused on weakening the rune, he had the dwarf run in and carve out the chunk.
What did he do while Clytus battled the rune?
He just waited to be of service. Every day, he walked with Clytus through the catacombs to the Colossus and waited. If you count the amount of times he wandered in and out of the catacombs with nothing to do, that dwarf must have known it like the back of his hand. You couldn't get much more dedicated.
What happened to him when he tried it the first time?
Even weakened, the rune's magic was strong. Clytus should have known better than to send a mensch to cut the rune. It killed him instantly. I believe that this is where Clytus finally went mad. He was so close to his goal, and his plans were about to be foiled by a lowly mensch. In desperation, he resurrected the dwarf, knowing that the result would be much more resistant to damage than the dwarf's original body. The corpse dragged himself up, and still loyal to Clytus, removed the chunk of stone from the containment rune. Clytus had succeeded in breaking the rune at only the cost of a mensch. A bargain.
Is that when Clytus instituted the practice of necromancy among the Sartan?
Come to think of it, you're right. Coincidental timing? Perhaps not. It's possible that he instituted the practice to justify his own actions. That's almost unthinkable. We've been using necromancy for thousands of years to cover for one man's mistake? I certainly hope that's not the case.
Where did he end up?
After Clytus had broken the containment rune, he had no further use of his servant. He banished him to the ancestral home of the dwarves. It's a complex of caves fairly near to Telestia. The dwarf obsessed about Clytus for years. Having the metal retention of the dead, he eventually forgot that he had completed the mission and broken the rune, so he sat in his cave waiting for Clytus to come and take him back to the catacombs. I think he's been waiting there ever since.
Let's move along to another subject.
Very well.
Tell me about the Scepter of Rulership.
After Clytus took the chunk from the Colossus, he fashioned a scepter and used the chunk as a headpiece. He brandished the finished product at the council and demanded a crown. They caved in almost immediately.
What kind of power did this scepter have?
Mostly destructive. It could turn a man to ash with no more than a flick of the wrist. I believe it also had powers of a more subtle nature, though my texts don't address these. What is written is that the scepter is unmatched in sheer destructive force.
How did it get its power?
When the chunk was removed from the Colossus, the containment rune was broken. Magic began to seep from it, much like blood from a wound. It was always Clytus's intention to draw magic from the wound for his own purposes. He found that he could focus this power through the piece of the Colossus that he possessed. That is why he fashioned the scepter, using the fragment as the headpiece.
Why did the council cave in? Wasn't it filled with master wizards?
Clytus was drawing upon the magic of the Colossus. Nothing could withstand that. Where the other wizards had to weave the rune construct slowly into the air and pull the possibilities of their spells into this reality, Clytus could just disintegrate them with the wave of his hand. Before any organized resistance could be brought to bear, Clytus had eliminated any council member powerful or stubborn enough to oppose him. The others fell into line like cattle.
Is there any way to counter the scepter?
That's like asking if there is any way to defeat the Colossus. In a sense, it is the same thing. The scepter draws upon the Colossus's power. It cannot be overcome. Although it wouldn't be necessary to overcome the scepter if it were rendered useless. This is just a wild thought. But the scepter focuses the power of the Colossus that is leaking from the broken containment rune. If the rune were completed and the containment spell resumed working, the scepter couldn't draw upon the magic. It would be useless. All of this speculation is worthless as well. You can't render the scepter useless without completing the containment rune. You can't complete the rune without replacing the headpiece inside the Colossus, and you can't get the headpiece without rendering the scepter useless. A vicious circle.
Where is the scepter now?
When Clytus grew too old to rule, he placed the scepter in the hands of his eldest son, Clytus II, and disappeared. The line is continued unbroken until this day. Clytus XIV now holds the scepter and rules Abarak. I would guess that he has it within his palace.
Let's talk about something else.
Very well.
Can you explain why Clytus ran away at the end?
I have a theory. After he passed the scepter on to his son, it was only a matter of time until he passed away, either naturally or at the hands of one of his many enemies. He decided to come here, to a secret cave where he could hide forever. Clytus entered and decided upon a small chamber for his final resting place. He cast an illusion spell upon the entrance in order to keep everyone out. Even if someone found these caverns, they wouldn't penetrate his inner sanctum. He had reasons to want not to be discovered. At the very end, he cast a self-immolation spell. This is surprising, but not totally unexplainable. I believe that Clytus actually feared resurrection more than death itself. By destroying his remains, even before he was dead, he assured himself that he would never be raised. That's why you found a pile of ashes inside his robes, which were fairly intact. The self-immolation spell destroys the body of the caster, but nothing else. It appears that Clytus wanted to minimize the chances of anyone finding and raising him, but even so, his actions seem extreme. His remains were completely destroyed. Why did he bother hiding in these forsaken caves, guarded by an illusion spell? I wonder if he was hiding anything else.
I found a book lying alongside of Clytus. It claims that necromancy is forbidden, and that for every person raised, another shall die untimely.
That is the final answer, the one I have been dreading my entire life. Necromancy is forbidden. Of course. You say that for every person brought back, another dies untimely? This is what we have termed the plague. We have unwittingly been killing ourselves for centuries, and we have done so at the command of a long-dead maniac. How could we have been so blind? We have to change. We have to put things right. I shall stop the practice of necromancy with my people, but it's only a start. We have to overthrow Clytus. We have to tell everyone.
Do you know how I could get to the Colossus?
The Colossus is located in the middle of the catacombs in the foundation of Clytus's palace. It's said that only the descendants of Clytus I are shown the way through. No one else is allowed in. Even if you were able to sneak back into the palace, I can't imagine how you would find your way to the center of that maze. Besides Clytus, there's no one living who can show you.
Well, you're right on the you're right by saying there's no one living who can show us, but there's someone dead.
That's all I need to know.
As you wish.
Okay. We finished the lengthy conversation with Balthazar, we now know the truth of this world, and unfortunately it's also the time to end the episode. So next time we'll finish Abarak, and then we'll go back to the Nexus, and then I'll delve into unexplored territory. For now, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed some more Deathgate, and as usual, don't miss the next episode, because I won't. I will see you all next time.